Maya Chen had always been the invisible girl at Roosevelt High School. She sat in the back corner of every classroom, ate lunch alone under the old oak tree behind the cafeteria, and walked the hallways with her eyes fixed on the worn linoleum floors. Her black hair fell like a curtain around her face, hiding the sharp intelligence that sparkled in her dark eyes. Most students didn't even know her name, despite her being in their classes for 3 years. What they didn't know was that Maya's silence wasn't born from shyness or fear. It came from necessity. At home, she cared for her elderly grandmother who spoke only Mandarin, worked part-time at her uncle's restaurant to help pay bills, and spent countless hours studying to maintain her perfect grades. Words felt like luxuries she couldn't afford when every moment counted toward survival. The trouble started on a gray Tuesday morning in October. Maya was walking to her first period chemistry class when she noticed the commotion near the main entrance. A group of seniors had cornered Kevin Martinez, a freshman who was barely 5 feet tall and wore thick glasses that made his eyes look enormous. Kevin was known throughout the school as the kid who loved astronomy and carried a worn telescope bag everywhere he went. "Look what we found," sneered Jake Morrison, the quarterback who thought his football jersey gave him permission to terrorize anyone smaller than him. "Little space boy with his fancy equipment. Bet this thing costs more than my car payment." Maya paused at her locker, watching as Jake grabbed Kevin's telescope bag and held it high above the boy's head. Kevin jumped desperately, trying to reach it, but Jake was nearly twice his height. The other seniors laughed and formed a loose circle, blocking Kevin's escape routes. "Please give it back," Kevin whispered, his voice barely audible over the morning chatter of other students hurrying to class. "It belonged to my dad." Maya's grip tightened on her chemistry textbook. She knew that telescope was everything to Kevin. She had seen him during lunch breaks, carefully cleaning the lenses and adjusting the settings with the gentle precision of someone handling a precious family heirloom. The way he talked about constellations and planets to anyone who would listen reminded Maya of her own passion for mathematics. Pure, honest, and completely unguarded. "Your dad?" Jake's voice dripped with mock sympathy. "Well, maybe Daddy should have bought you something more useful, like boxing lessons." He tossed the bag to his friend Marcus, who caught it with theatrical flair. The circle of seniors tightened around Kevin, who was now close to tears. Other students walked by, some slowing down to watch, but none stopping to help. Maya recognized the look on their faces, the same mixture of relief and guilt that came from being grateful it wasn't happening to them. Maya had seen this dance before. In middle school, she had watched quietly as bullies picked on different targets week after week. She had learned that speaking up often just redirected the attention to yourself, and she couldn't afford to become a target. Her family needed her focused, needed her grades perfect for the scholarship opportunities that would lift them out of their cramped apartment above the restaurant. But something was different about this moment. Maybe it was the way Kevin's shoulders shook as he tried to hold back tears, or the casual cruelty in Jake's voice as he talked about the boy's deceased father. Maya felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest, a feeling she recognized from the nights when she stayed up late doing homework while listening to her grandmother's labored breathing in the next room. "Come on, space boy," Marcus called out, holding the telescope bag just out of Kevin's reach. "Jump higher! Pretend you're trying to reach the moon!" The laughter from the circle grew louder, attracting more attention from passing students. Maya watched as Kevin's face flushed red with humiliation, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. She recognized that moment of decision, the instant when someone decides whether to fight back or surrender completely. Maya closed her locker with a soft click that somehow seemed to echo in the hallway. She adjusted her backpack on her shoulders and began walking toward the group, her sneakers silent on the polished floor. She moved with the same careful precision she used when solving complex equations, each step calculated, purposeful, unstoppable. The crowd around Kevin was growing as more students stopped to watch the entertainment. Maya could hear whispered comments and nervous laughter from the audience. Some students had their phones out, ready to record whatever happened next for social media. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the scene. Maya reached the outer edge of the circle and stood perfectly still, her chemistry book clutched against her chest. She didn't say anything, didn't move to enter the circle or call for help. She simply stood there, watching with the same intense focus she brought to her studies. At first, no one noticed her. But gradually, students began to turn and look at the quiet girl who had positioned herself like a sentinel at the edge of their entertainment. There was something unsettling about her presence, the way she stood so perfectly still, the way her dark eyes seemed to take in every detail of what was happening. Jake was still playing keep-away with Kevin's telescope, but Maya noticed his movements becoming less confident as more people turned to look at her instead of him. The power of the moment was shifting in a way that nobody quite understood yet. Maya had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than words, that watching could be more effective than acting. She had spent years observing human behavior, understanding the delicate social dynamics that governed teenage hierarchies. And in that moment, standing at the edge of the circle, she began to put that knowledge to use in ways that would surprise everyone, including herself. The first bell rang, signaling 5 minutes until class began. Students started to shift nervously, aware that teachers would soon emerge from their classrooms. But Maya remained perfectly still, her presence becoming impossible to ignore as the crowd grew more uncomfortable under her steady gaze. Maya's silent presence began to work like ripples in a pond. One by one, other students stopped their conversations and turned to look at her. She stood motionless at the edge of the circle, her dark eyes moving slowly from Jake to Marcus to each of the other seniors who had trapped Kevin. Her expression never changed, but there was something in her stillness that made people deeply uncomfortable. "What's she looking at?" Marcus muttered, still holding Kevin's telescope bag but no longer tossing it playfully. Maya's gaze had settled on him with the weight of a spotlight, and he found himself shifting from foot to foot under her scrutiny. Maya had discovered something powerful in that moment of observation. She realized that bullies like Jake and Marcus drew their strength from the reactions of others, the laughter, the fear, the participation of the crowd. They needed an audience to validate their power, to make their cruelty feel like entertainment rather than what it really was. But Maya wasn't laughing. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even disapproving in an obvious way. She was simply there, watching with the patience of someone who had learned to see everything and reveal nothing. Her silence created a vacuum where the bullies expected noise, and that vacuum began to pull the energy out of their performance. More students had stopped to stare at Maya instead of the confrontation. Whispers spread through the growing crowd like static electricity. "Who is that girl? Why is she just standing there? Do you know her name?" Maya had become the center of attention without moving a muscle or saying a word. Kevin, still trapped in the middle of the circle, noticed the shift in atmosphere. The seniors were no longer focused entirely on him. Jake kept glancing over at Maya with growing irritation, as if her presence was somehow ruining his fun. The easy confidence he had shown moments before began to crack around the edges. "Hey, quiet girl," Jake called out, his voice louder than necessary. "You got something to say, or are you just going to stand there like a statue?" Maya didn't respond. She didn't even acknowledge that he had spoken. Her gaze remained steady, moving from face to face in the circle as if she was memorizing each person involved. Several students in the crowd began to shuffle nervously, realizing that they too were being cataloged by those dark, intelligent eyes. What the other students didn't know was that Maya was indeed memorizing everything: names, faces, exact words spoken, who laughed and who looked uncomfortable. She was building a mental file with the systematic precision she brought to her mathematical proofs. But unlike her homework, This wasn't for a grade. This was for justice. Jake's frustration was becoming visible. The power dynamic he had carefully constructed was crumbling under Maya's silent observation. He was used to victims who either fought back or submitted completely. Maya was doing neither, and her refusal to play by the established rules was making him look foolish. "I'm talking to you, freak," Jake said, taking a step toward Maya. "You got a problem with me?" Still, Maya remained silent. But something subtle changed in her posture. She shifted her weight slightly, and suddenly every person in the hallway could feel the difference. There was steel beneath her quiet exterior, a strength that had nothing to do with physical size or social status. The crowd continued to grow as news of the standoff spread through the school's invisible communication network. Students emerged from classrooms and bathrooms, drawn by the electric tension that was building in the main hallway. Teachers would normally have intervened by now, but the morning staff meeting was running late in the conference room at the far end of the building. Sarah Kim, a junior who sat behind Maya in calculus class, pushed through the crowd to get a better look. She had never paid much attention to the quiet girl before, but watching Maya face down Jake Morrison without saying a word was the most fascinating thing she had seen all year. "She's not backing down," Sarah whispered to her friend. "She's actually not backing down." Kevin, still clutching desperately for his telescope bag, began to notice that something fundamental had changed. The seniors were no longer treating him like their primary entertainment. Their attention was divided, their confidence shaken by Maya's inexplicable presence. For the first time since the confrontation began, Kevin felt a flicker of hope. Maya's strategy was becoming clear to those who watched carefully. She wasn't trying to intimidate the bullies with threats or physical confrontation. Instead, she was systematically dismantling their power by refusing to participate in the social theater that gave their actions meaning. Without an audience that reacted appropriately, bullying became just what it really was: pathetic cruelty that said more about the perpetrators than their victims. Marcus, growing increasingly uncomfortable under Maya's steady gaze, made the mistake of trying to reassert control. "You know what? I think Space Boy's telescope needs to take a little trip." He raised the bag over his head as if to throw it down the hallway. That's when Maya moved for the first time since taking her position. She pulled her phone from her pocket with smooth, deliberate precision. The device seemed to appear in her hand like magic, and she held it up at eye level, obviously recording everything that was happening. The effect was immediate and electric. Students throughout the crowd began pulling out their own phones, suddenly understanding what Maya was doing. Within seconds, a dozen cameras were pointed at Jake and his friends, all recording the confrontation from different angles. "Oh, man," someone in the crowd whispered. "She's recording everything." Jake's face went pale as he realized what was happening. In the age of social media and instant communication, being caught on video bullying a smaller student was social suicide. College admissions officers checked social media accounts. Scholarship committees reviewed online behavior. His football coach had already threatened the team with consequences if anyone brought negative attention to the school. But Maya still hadn't said a word. She simply held her phone steady, documenting everything with the same methodical precision she brought to her laboratory experiments. The red recording light seemed to burn in the fluorescent hallway lighting, marking this moment as one that would not be forgotten or ignored. Marcus immediately lowered Kevin's telescope bag, no longer willing to risk being filmed throwing it. The other seniors in the circle began to step back, creating distance between themselves and the obvious bullying behavior. The crowd of students continued recording, turning what had started as private cruelty into very public accountability. Maya finally lowered her phone, but she didn't put it away. She held it at her side, ready to resume recording if necessary. Her message was clear without her having to speak it. She was watching, she was documenting, and she would not be ignored. The power shift in the hallway was complete. Jake Morrison, who had started the morning feeling invincible in his Letterman jacket, now found himself surrounded by dozens of recording phones and the unwavering gaze of a girl who had never spoken in his presence. His friends were backing away, suddenly very interested in their shoes or their lockers or anything that wasn't the confrontation they had eagerly joined just minutes before. Maya continued to stand perfectly still, her phone ready but lowered. She had created something unprecedented in Roosevelt High School's social ecosystem, a moment where the bullies were more afraid than their victim. The silence stretched out like a held breath, with everyone waiting to see who would break first. Kevin, still clutching for his telescope bag, realized that Marcus was no longer holding it high above his head. In fact, Marcus was holding it at chest level, looking around nervously at all the cameras pointed in his direction. The bag was within Kevin's reach now, but he seemed afraid to grab it, as if sudden movement might shatter whatever spell Maya had cast over the situation. Maya noticed Kevin's hesitation and made her second deliberate movement. She shifted her gaze directly to Kevin and gave him the smallest possible nod, barely more than a slight lowering of her chin. But Kevin understood immediately. He reached out and gently took his telescope bag from Marcus's suddenly slack grip. Marcus didn't resist. He couldn't resist, not with dozens of phones recording his every move and Maya's dark eyes cataloging his choices. He simply let the bag go and stepped back, his face burning with embarrassment. Kevin clutched his father's telescope against his chest, his whole body trembling with relief. He looked over at Maya with tears still threatening to fall, but she wasn't looking at him anymore. Her attention had returned to Jake, who was clearly struggling to find a way out of the situation that wouldn't destroy his reputation completely. The crowd had grown to include nearly 50 students, all drawn by the magnetic tension of the confrontation. Social media notifications were already pinging throughout the school as early videos of the standoff began to circulate. Maya's strategy was working beyond even her own expectations. She had turned private humiliation into public accountability. Jake finally found his voice, but it came out strained and defensive. "Look, we were just messing around. It's not like we were going to actually hurt the kid or break his stuff." Maya's response was to raise her phone again and resume recording. Her message was crystal clear. His excuses were being documented just as thoroughly as his actions. Several students in the crowd laughed at Jake's obvious discomfort, and the sound seemed to echo off the hallway walls like judgment. For the first time in his high school career, Jake Morrison was experiencing what his victims felt, the sensation of being watched, judged, and found wanting by an audience that held his social future in their hands. Maya had engineered a complete reversal of power using nothing but silence, observation, and the collective conscience of their student body. Sarah Kim, still watching from the crowd, whispered to her friend, "She's a genius. She didn't have to say anything mean or get in trouble for fighting. She just made them look like idiots in front of everyone." Maya lowered her phone again, but this time she took a small step forward. It wasn't threatening or aggressive. She was still several feet away from Jake and his diminishing group of supporters. But that single step conveyed volumes. It said that she wasn't intimidated, wasn't backing down, and wasn't finished documenting their behavior. The morning bell rang again. 2 minutes until classes officially began. Teachers would be emerging from their meeting any moment, and students needed to clear the hallways. But nobody moved. The confrontation had become the most compelling drama any of them had witnessed in years, and Maya's silent performance was holding everyone captive. Jake looked around desperately for support from his friends, but found them melting away into the crowd. Marcus had already disappeared entirely, probably heading to the bathroom to avoid further documentation. The other seniors who had formed the bullying circle were now scattered throughout the hallway, trying to blend in with innocent bystanders. Kevin, emboldened by Maya's protection and the crowd's obvious support, finally found his own voice. "You made me think my dad's telescope was going to be broken," he said quietly, but loud enough for the phones to pick up. "This is the only thing I have left of him." The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Several students made sounds of sympathy and anger, and multiple people called out, "That's messed up. Jake, and leave him alone." Maya had created a space where Kevin felt safe to tell his truth, and that truth was damning. Jake's face went from pale to red as he realized how badly he had miscalculated the situation. Bullying was one thing, but threatening a dead father's memory was quite another. He opened his mouth to say something, probably another excuse or justification. But Maya raised her phone for the third time, and he snapped his jaw shut. Maya had learned something profound about power in those few minutes. Real strength didn't come from size or popularity or the ability to intimidate others. It came from refusing to be complicit in cruelty, from standing witness to injustice, and from creating spaces where truth could be spoken safely. The sound of adult voices echoed from the direction of the conference room as the teachers' meeting finally ended. Students began to scatter toward their classrooms, but the energy in the hallway had permanently shifted. Jake Morrison was no longer the untouchable quarterback who could terrorize freshmen without consequences. He was just another student who had been caught being cruel and would have to live with the documentation of that cruelty. Maya pocketed her phone and adjusted her backpack straps. She had never intended to become involved in the confrontation, but she had discovered something important about herself in the process. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was a choice. And when she chose to break that silence, it would be for something that mattered. Kevin approached her hesitantly as the crowd dispersed. "Thank you," he whispered, still clutching his telescope bag. "I don't know how you did that, but thank you." Maya looked at him for a moment, seeing herself in his gratitude and vulnerability. She gave him another small nod, and then walked toward her chemistry class, leaving Kevin standing in the hallway with his father's telescope safe in his arms. By lunchtime, videos of the confrontation had spread throughout the entire school. Maya Chen was no longer the invisible girl who sat in the back of classrooms. She had become something else entirely, a legend whispered about in hallways, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply refusing to look away. She still didn't speak much in class or eat lunch with groups of friends, but when she walked through the hallways now, students stepped aside with respect rather than indifference. They had seen what happened when someone with nothing to lose decided that silence could be a weapon against injustice. Maya had ended the fight without uttering a single word, but her actions had spoken volumes about courage, dignity, and the power of bearing witness to truth.